Have you ever wanted a new start, or perhaps the chance to make another first impression? Have you ever considered dyeing your hair a strange colour? Kyo Kare Ore wa, or Starting Today, are, as you can tell by the title, is about the new beginnings for our two main characters, and what began for them as simply a haircut is in fact the start of a brand new way of life. Delinquent anime and manga have long been favourites of mine, and that's not just because people don't know about them. Kyo Kare Ore wa here is actually one of the better known series. In fact, it's even within the top 200 on my anime list. However, the manga of course is what receives the bulk of the attention, not the OVA. But it's a lot easier for me to make videos about the OVA than the manga. The series serves as a great introduction to the world of Delinquents, or Yankee as they're known in Japan. It's full of men amongst men, rooftop duels, and just guys being dudes. I originally got into this series for the general delinquency, but it's actually full of charm and comedy. However, some of the jokes may be a little too Japanese. Mitsuhashi and Ito, our two main characters, decide, much like any other high schooler, that their new school is the perfect opportunity to reinvent themselves, and much to their annoyance, they also have the exact same idea. Now, as I painfully found out when I was 17 years old, reinventing yourself is no easy task, and the duo soon discover that acting tough requires a lot more than just acting. Of course, since this is an anime, the characters don't have to worry about expulsions or suspensions or having to get their homework in on time, and can rely upon a smarter friend to write their essays or whatever. School instead is used purely as a meeting place for fights, love, and just a little bit of drama. Now, speaking of plot, the show is actually rather aimless. It is, after all, an original video animation based upon a manga. Therefore, it's more focused on portraying the best parts of characters, their interaction and development, rather than trying to tackle 38 volumes. I will say, however, all of those volumes are certainly worth reading, but you can decide that for yourselves after watching the OVA. At first glance, you may actually mistake the franchise for being a shonen. A shonen, of course, is something like Dragon Ball Z or One Piece or one of those classics with far too many episodes for anyone to be bothered with. These all feature some sort of goal or target or a recipe that's never been cooked before, and just a challenge that has to be overcome by the protagonist, whether through the power of will or the power of friendship or just sheer training. Kyo Kare Ore wa, on the other hand, does not have that. In fact, even compared to the genre Kyo Kare Ore wa is actually in, that is the delinquent genre, Kyo Kare Ore wa is quite different. In some delinquent series, the entire series may be spent on the main characters becoming boss of the school or becoming well known. In Kyo Kare Ore wa, spoilers by the way, the boss of the school is defeated within the first episode. This is what sets Kyo Kare Ore wa apart from others, and also what defines it more as a sort of slice of life, but with gang violence. Think of each episode having maybe almost an hour's worth of comedy, fighting, and just delinquent dudes doing delinquent things. As I elaborated upon earlier, the OVA is focused on displaying the characters, and the characters are the strongest part of this series. Mitsuhashi and Ito, our main characters, are used to demonstrate and then subvert traditional themes and traits of an anime and manga. Ito represents convention, with his more Japanese disposition. Mitsuhashi, with his bright blonde hair and trickster attitude, represents the unconventional. Of course, no franchise is complete without a colourful host of side characters, and as the primary rivals to our main duo is in fact another delinquent duo, that of Imai and Tanigawa of Benny High. They provide much of the comic relief in the series by serving mainly as the folly to the more serious actions taken by Ito and Mitsuhashi, as well as representing the stereotypical bancho and underling duo commonly found in other delinquent manga. Alongside my favourite hapless duo, there are in fact some other characters. There is of course some love interests, a rival who can actually hold his own against Mitsuhashi and Ito, and also various different antagonists and deuter antagonists such as teachers, other delinquents, middle schoolers, and even some yakuza. Not only does the show provide us with action, comedy, romance, and nostalgia for the trouble we got in at school, Kyo Kare Ore wa also offers a very Japanese experience, with the manga being published from 1988 until 1997, and the OVAs all being released across the 90s, were treated to the social norms and conventions for high schoolers who adopt alternative lifestyles or alternative hairstyles. We are granted a brief snapshot into what it's like for these teenagers to have their first jobs, their first girlfriends, alongside many other firsts that a teenager in 90s Japan would experience. This also includes areas of the Japanese school system, such as school clubs and more importantly school trips, which involve prefectural rivalries and regional differences. Younger viewers might have already noticed by now, but there are in fact no mobile phones. Not even the world-renowned Japanese flip phone makes an appearance. Instead we get things like address books or widescreen CRT TVs, which does stress the age of the franchise, but with modern reinterpretations of older shows becoming more common, such as Banana Fish example, and using modern technology or completely changing the time period instead, I find this a welcome change from the more technology-laden shows of today. Now these cultural insights have only come through the passing of time. I don't believe for a second that the author ever thought someone on YouTube 20 years later would consider his show a cultural reference point, but here we are. Now originally the source material was a gag manga, so the show has a lot of comedy thrown in, with many references to more traditional forms of Japanese humour and even some kabuki theatre if you can spot it. I don't want to spoil the humour however, as it's one of the things I like so much about the show. It's sort of a perfect blend of motion and sound recreating traditional gag style manga panels, but also with a lot of more drawn out jokes. It's quite hard to describe, it's very Japanese, but I love it. It's a bit like Gintama in some ways, if you've ever watched Gintama, which is a very Japanese retelling of the Warring States period involving aliens and science fiction. But the director's choices and the animation used perfectly accentuate the different art styles employed by the original author and artist to create these sort of comedic setups and one-liner gags. Now on the previous episode you might have noticed, but I didn't really talk about animation or art style beyond calling it ugly. This show, however, is different. Being an OVA of a popular series, at least at the time, the show has a considerably large animation budget and it shows. Now hand-drawn anime is certainly a weakness of mine, but even then the production values of this show are really quite high. The fight scenes are fluid and dynamic, the colouring and shading is done really quite well, and the animation team are able to mix animation styles cleverly and smoothly for comedic effect. Ideally this should all be present in my video, but honestly if you can't spot it, it is there in the OVA. I'd show more, but as I said earlier, I really don't want to spoil some of the best parts of the show. There's not much else I can say here before this turns into an in-depth review, but if you find what I've said to be to your taste, then you should certainly watch Kyokare Orewa, and of course if you like what you see, then I highly recommend you read the original manga. Now, if there are aspects of the show that don't agree with you, I still think you should give it a chance, or perhaps even read the manga first. It is after all an OVA, and therefore it could be considered more of a treat for those who are already fans of the franchise. I myself watched it, then I read the manga, and then now that I've watched it again after making this video, I've come to appreciate the OVA even more. I hope you've all enjoyed my video, and I hope that you all go on to enjoy Kyokare Orewa. The series has been a long time favourite of mine, so making this video was quite the treat for me. Now, of course, I will say please support the official release, especially if you have an official release. Some of this stuff doesn't really get released here in the English-speaking West, but I know in places like Italy and France you get all sorts of interesting titles that I wish I could get my hands upon. Now, if there's anything you think I've made a mistake upon in this video, or something you'd like me to cover in the future, please say so in the comments. Finding obscure stuff can actually be a challenge within itself, simply due to the nature that it is obscure, so if there's anything you think is underappreciated, or should be far more well known, or you just think would make a good video, please say so below. Now, I'd like to thank everyone who watched this far, and I'd like to thank anyone who's bothered to subscribe or like the video, and those who comment, and I hope to see you all next time on Anime Obscura.